Okay, so we're going live, and I'm Tara Gold, and this is James Fox, who I just have to say, James, I'm going to say a little bit about who you are from your bio first, and then take it from there, if you don't mind. Yeah? I also want everyone to know we have a bit of a delay because James lives in a gorgeous remote place. I love where you live, and sometimes the Wi-Fi is not great, but we're still going to have this conversation. So James Fox, he began teaching yoga and meditation to prisons at San Quentin in 2002. And his years of experience as a facilitator of victim offender education, violence prevention, and emotional literacy classes for prisoners informed his work with prisoners and the eventual founding of the Prison Yoga Project, to which he is the director. And a lot of what you have done with the prisons here in the U.S. is incredible. And I know you're also spreading that work out into international realms at this point too. James is also the author of Yoga, A Path for Healing and Recovery, which is distributed by request free of charge to prisoners. I love that part. And I want to say that personally, I just love you, James, because I've known you so long, and I got to know you even before yoga, before you taught yoga, before I taught yoga and shared any yogic things in the world in big ways. And it's just such a beautiful chance to get to talk to you and share more about what you've done since we first met so long ago. So thank you for joining me, James. Can I ask you anything?
Yeah, thank you, Tara.
Oh, go ahead. There's that delay, but I'm going to listen to you. Go ahead.
No, thanks very much. It feels like a reunion. We haven't seen each other for a few years, so I'm really happy to be spending the time with you.
Yeah, I feel it too. And, you know, your personal journey is one that I'm still learning about, even though I have known you a long time. And so I just wondered anything you could share about your journey that helped develop the curriculum that's been so significant in helping so many people in the prison systems at this point.
Well, I became a yoga teacher for the express purpose of bringing yoga to people who weren't being exposed to yoga. So that was in 2000 when I started teaching. And I was motivated because I felt that there were some real possibilities for healing that could be afforded various populations that didn't have access to yoga. And I also was drawing on my own personal experience of growing up in an urban environment in Chicago and dealing with a lot of issues that particularly male youth deal with. And the more disenfranchised the male youth, the bigger the problems are. And I'm pretty much talking about, you know, when you look at people who are incarcerated, two of the most common denominators are violence and addiction. And having brushed up against both of those as a young man, I felt that yoga had a real opportunity to address some of the symptoms of those issues. And that's what led me to start working with initially young men, at-risk young men, and then being asked in 2002 by a major restorative justice organization to come into San Quentin with a yoga program. So that's how it started.
Mm-hmm. And given how long you've been working in that system too, I know that you're taking more of an executive position, but you mentioned to me how important it is to always keep going back in and to stay really connected to what's going on in the prisons. I really respect you for that. I know that there are a lot of people working in this realm. Sometimes they don't. So I love that you told me that you just went back in for the last 3 weeks. And I'm just curious anything you could share about that, because you said it was good to be back, but also hard to be back after COVID. Yeah.
So over the 18 years of teaching at San Quentin, and also, believe it or not, guest teaching in jails and prisons in the United States and outside of the United States. So I've been in a lot of jails and prisons. Um, and I've seen, whether it's going into a jail or prison in the US or Mexico or different countries in Europe, I see the same benefits that are being experienced by participants in the program. Um, and over the years, what started out really as sort of a intuitive approach to um, applying yoga practices for the issues that incarcerated people were dealing with, then the whole world of, or at least a lot of information about trauma came to the fore, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. And some of the great teachers of trauma, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, the psychiatrist who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, and Peter Levine, who wrote Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma, so that trauma has become much more of a public issue in the United States over the last, say, decade.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that had to do with military veterans returning from active duty and basically needing support to reintegrate back into society. Well, so as I continued to teach over the years, my teaching evolved with this understanding of the impact of trauma. And as we were talking about before we started this discussion, particularly developmental trauma, or what's often referred to as complex trauma, which is childhood trauma that carries on into adulthood. And my feeling is that a lot of that developmental trauma and childhood trauma actually leads to criminal behavior as a way of not being able to cope and not being provided the services to deal with the trauma. It leads to criminal behavior as a lifestyle and as a survival mechanism. And so I feel really strongly about, regardless of the fact that I've done a lot of training in yoga, a lot of training in behavioral psychology, a lot of training in trauma, I'm still evolving. I'm still evolving as a person, and I'm certainly evolving as a teacher. And so it's really important for me to stay current with the issues that are going on. For instance, I've been going back in, as I mentioned to you, I've been going back into San Quentin for the last 3 weeks after not having been there for 15 months because of the COVID pandemic. So now I'm seeing the impact that the COVID pandemic had. 2,800 prisoners at San Quentin were infected by the coronavirus. 2,800 out of 3,600 incarcerated people at San Quentin got the coronavirus. Then they were locked down. Then they experienced extreme confinement, being locked down they were locked in their cells essentially for a period of about 10 months, where they were allowed out of the cell for 3 hours every 2 days. And so on top of having experienced direct health issues from the coronavirus, they also experienced extreme stress, extreme anxiety, and this whole issue of confinement that has a direct impact on their mental health. So I can see very clearly now that this is calling upon me to really address these mental health issues that people who are incarcerated are having to deal with as a result of the pandemic. So that's just one example of the need to continue to stay fresh and evolve.
What are some of the tools that you are finding most useful to share, not just based on 18 years or more, but also currently? Because, of course, anything that's a tool is sometimes perfect for one moment and totally the wrong thing for another. So I'm curious what your most current experiences are showing you.
Yes. Well, because it's an evolutionary process, I'm
Right.
still learning
Well, that's what I'm saying.
after
Yeah.
3 weeks of going in. Right, right. I started out, I basically took a cue from IAYT's, some of the work that the International Association of Yoga Therapists has done on long haul effects of COVID, and some recommendations for practices, particularly by Dr. Ingrid Wang out of San Diego. So I started out very, very slowly, the first couple of classes. And then I found, interestingly, that what my students were asking for was a more active practice.
Mhm.
And so I was, of course, paying attention to what it was that they were asking for. And I understood that, oh, I see what's happening is they're essentially sitting on all of these emotional issues. And so, particularly, I draw on Peter Levine, and I think about, oh, there's this great need to discharge
Mm.
what it is that they're sitting upon. And although I want to build into the practice, I mean, I don't want to hit them right away with a very, very active practice. I do want to build up to it, but I'm seeing that they're asking me to build up to it more quickly than I had anticipated.
Mm.
And that I'm seeing the results of it. I'm seeing, for instance, I'm seeing a major impact in Shavasana.
Mhm.
Um, and reports, direct reports from participants that it's the most restful time that I've experienced in a year.
I'm
The
curious.
5 minutes that I was in.
I'm curious if you've
Yeah.
during your shavasana, if you're doing anything that is with particular with pranayama or yoga nidra type practices. I'm curious if that's built into how you share
Very.
shavasana.
Yeah, well, I probably take a minute to guide into Shavasana. Um, and then I'm letting them experience the other 4 minutes to be in stillness and to be quiet, which is a rarity, by the way, in a prison setting. It's an absolute rarity to have any kind of quiet. So we're creating sacred space all the time when we're doing this. I am going to start introducing yoga nidra, maybe next week, because I found that can be very, very beneficial.
Mhm.
And then more pranayam than usual, and particularly more pranayam for dealing with the respiratory system, rebuilding respiratory system. And then one more thing that I've seen is a lot of weight gain as a result of being locked down and eating institutional food.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a new ball game.
Wow. Um, what can you share? I know we don't have a lot of time together, but I'm really looking forward to spending time with you this fall. I know you're going to join me and participants of the Yoga and the Healing Sciences program, and we haven't always had you there, so it's really special to me that you'll be joining. And I'm looking forward to hearing also just how this is evolving for you, what you're discovering that's most useful in helping. And I'm grateful that you are involved in
Uh,
what's shifting and changing right now for supporting people that need it
yeah,
in the prison systems. Is there anything more you can say? Can you say
yeah.
anything?
It
Can you tell people where they can find you or find more about the work?
Yes. Yeah, you can find us on prisonyogaproject.org. We have a 24-hour foundational training for teachers, yoga teachers, social workers, therapists, people who are involved in this kind of work. And there's a lot more information on that site as well.
And I highly recommend it. I'm really happy to see you. Thank you, James. Thank you.